And so that's the problem with this nonsense, is that the odds of generating a pandemic virus in the laboratory when you set out to do it are pretty close to 1. Like, probability of 1. And the probability of nature generating a pandemic virus is someone like 1,000,000 to 1. Hope everybody's okay down there. Haven't really checked anything in a while. Knock on wood. Let's cue this up just in case. J.C. Morning Report, take 1, I guess. So the tough part about the morning report is that every morning I've got 2 very big hills that somehow or another don't manifest themselves in the same way on the way home. This is the first one, and it's right at the beginning. It's not that handy. Now, I have an electric bike, so I'm whining about nothing. But it does require me to work. It's a 250 watt electric bike from 2016. It's old, it's loud. So, good morning Pittsburgh and universe. This is J.C. on a bike. Morning report. It is sometime in May. It snowed over the weekend. And I didn't go to work on Monday. So I guess it's Tuesday now. The morning report is always harder because I have more hills in the morning and the wind tends to be pretty loud and obnoxious through this valley. And no matter what I do, I don't normally get lucky enough to not be breathing hard by now. But I'm tired of wasting this ride, so I decided I'd try and use it. And I think there's enough to talk about now. I can do little segments between blowing my nose and breathing hard and spitting. Seems like once all the mucous membranes start flowing in the morning, if the wind is blowing you, you can't stop. And so by the time I get down in this valley, I'm already breathing hard. And just on a technical note, 250 watts means I have to pedal, and I have no throttle, and I shift gears manually. So although the bike is a blast to ride, it still rides like a bicycle and does all the things like a bicycle does. And you don't get anywhere if you don't know how to ride a bicycle. It's not a moped. And because it has this torque sensor built into it, the harder I pedal, the more it helps me. So if I pedal like a lazy person, I don't get very much back. But if I push hard, then the bike responds with a boost. And so as long as I keep the chain tensioned, it keeps helping me. But the moment the chain isn't tensioned anymore, it doesn't help. And as I said, it's somewhat linearly related to how hard I push. So if I use the lower gear, I can't generate as much tension, so I don't get as much help. And conversely, if I get out of the range of the bike, then the motor can't spin fast enough to help me. Nice flag, huh? So where to begin on this morning report? Well, I want to talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. See what I can do with this. It's a pretty well-known phrase. It's kind of evolved to mean throwing out good information with bad information, or, you know, by dismissing something in total, you can discard something of great value. And so people might make the argument, for example, that with religion, a lot of times we throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's a lot of bullshit with religion. Represented by the dirty bathwater, but in that bathwater there's also a baby that might be very valuable and worth preserving. And this baby with the bathwater thing is used against us a lot of times in terms of propaganda. And that's what I kind of want to talk about. What's going on in the news right now feels a lot like them repeatedly. It feels like the media is repeatedly setting us up to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what I mean by that is setting up sort of two points of view and setting up a narrative so that it's very almost logical to reject one of those 2 points of view. But no matter which point of view you choose, you will inevitably be required to ignore something that is provably true, testably true, even obviously true. And that's the magic of the left and the right in America right now. And that's what's the magic about the lack of biology and frank biological discussion in the media when it comes to the coronavirus and what I'm trying to fight against. One of the best examples of this is the insistence from all the voices that get amplified in the mainstream media. All the voices always speak in unison about important issues, and especially about important deceptions and important messages that they want to be sure get across. And the uniformity around the messaging with regard to this is a virus from a market, a naturally zoonotic event, the messaging is so clear and crystal, the legalese chosen is so often identical. Just one example, how many different people have you heard use the term gene jockey? I've read it in at least 10 articles and heard it in at least 2 interviews. It's a talking point. It's like that video they showed you with all the local newscasters saying, "This is dangerous for our democracy. This is dangerous for our democracy." All reciting the same mantra. These media sources that keep saying that this is a natural zoonotic event that comes from poor people eating in a market, this mantra is too clean and too pure and too often repeated. Well, the lady doth protest too much there's a line in Shakespeare like this in Hamlet. The lady doth protest too much, denke ich. I think that's the line. And it is. And the reason why is because there's an extraordinary amount of work that's been done to collect and catalog viruses in the wild, to find them, and then to recombinantly recombine them to try and understand how they work. And they've used all methods, tried and true, and all techniques available to us to manipulate these viruses in ways that would otherwise not occur in nature in order to try and understand them. Now, you could see this as no different than trying to breed wild animals to see what happens when you put them together and then try to understand how species evolve. It's no different than that, but what dangers are different? And I think the point that I would like to make and have been trying to make from the beginning, I lost my speedometer there. The point that I've been trying to make from the beginning is that we have an obligation to figure out the truth, because if it's a natural zoonotic event, then we can expect it to behave like SARS or MERS or any of the other viruses from the past. I know we got a problem. I don't have a way of letting that off. Son of a bitch. What the hell happened there? It's like a wire's loose in there or something. I'd have to finish that. I don't like to have to Fonzie my bike. All right. But the point I'm trying to make here, and I'm going to keep trying to make, is that gain-of-function research in viruses occurs. And we've been using it to study how viruses work and to pioneer different strategies for generating vaccines. But let's remember that generating a vaccine for a virus could be argued, and has been argued by many biologists. Here's the second hill. This is the second hill that's a pain in my ass in the morning. Is that many biologists would argue that creating viruses that didn't exist already with potentially novel emergent properties that we didn't expect is pretty irresponsible. It's a bit like our genetic modification of plants. You could make a similar argument about how irresponsible that is, but again, I feel like it should come down to objective weighing of risks versus benefits. And so if you could make an argument that by genetically modifying these viruses, we can mitigate their risk, then I think it's valid science, right? And a guy like Peter Daszak has, through his organization called Eco Health Alliance, has extracted millions of dollars from the public and private sector, claiming to be working for the betterment of humankind by collecting and cataloging, as he puts it, the hundreds of thousands of viruses waiting in nature to kill us. That's a real tweet from him. So what he wants you to believe, and what Bill Gates wants you to believe, and what the people like Fauci want you to believe, is that funding this research in North Carolina and later in China, indirectly through non-governmental organizations like Peter Daszak's, the NIH can sort of wipe their hands. The NIADA, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, the one that Fauci is the head of. You see, one thing you need to realize in this rambling bike ride is that it's all information. It might not be perfectly organized because it's morning and I got 2 hills to ride. But the NIH is not one single entity. It is very possible that one wing of the NIH is highly corrupt by big pharmaceutical companies, and the other branches of NIH are not. And I'm not covering my ass because I get funding from other organizations. I'm covering my ass because I don't think it's a logical conspiracy to say that the entire NIH is a fraud. And again, that's the baby with the bathwater. The conservative temptation here that they're putting out on the media is to throw the entire NIH out. What a bunch of thieves, right? No. That's the baby with the bathwater. The truth is that one part of the NIH is likely pretty corrupt. Corrupted by money. And corrupted by the possibility that, I just give you one example of something that I find a little odd as a biologist. Think about prion diseases. About 10 years ago, I guess, when mad cow disease came out and we were all worried that we would all get mad cow from shit being in our meat. You remember those days? Now those days are all gone. But we don't really understand prion diseases any better. There's a prion disease going around right now in wild deer, another chronic wasting disease. And we're not doing much about that. We don't care about that because it doesn't affect humans right now. But also because there's no real way to make money off of a disease like that. That disease is frightening. There's no way to play with that disease. Prion diseases are not something that we could ever use for a theater, that we could ever use to scare people with. It wouldn't work because they're too nasty. And again, I can't stress enough how so much of coronavirus biology before this pandemic was completely unknown to me. And I'm just shocked at how often it seems they avoid giving any of it out on television. You know, saying things that could put people's mind at ease. They don't choose to do that. Should be another alarm bell. But gain of function research, under the rubric of trying to understand viral biology, is applying rules that don't really work for viruses. And I'm going to try and, this thing just came to mind right now. I think it's kind of a neat idea. But I'll try to have to remember that and come back later. There's 3 things that I wanted to say this morning and I wasn't getting to them, but now I will. The throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's a couple great examples of what's going on right now. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater used against you. The first and foremost important one is this Judy Mitsovich. I'm pronouncing her name incorrectly because I don't care what her liar name is. But you're going to want to believe her. You're going to want to believe this narrative that, oh, they're taking down the video, so it must be true. You see, they're playing with us here, folks. They're playing with us. This is the first example I'm going to give you. This lady is a gigantic fraud. And everybody in biology knows that. But she's got a couple nuggets of truth that she mixes in with her 3 cups of lies. And that's why they're letting her get away with it. That's why they're generating this extra media hype. If they were serious about taking down the free speech of this lady, and if she was seriously saying something wrong that they didn't want you to hear, they would do something about her. And they're not doing anything about her because they want you to be confused by her. They want this to be a left and right fight. And the anti-vaxxer movement is a trap. It's a trap. Once you get involved with the anti-vaxxer movement or start to identify with the anti-vaxxer movement, it's very easy for the average person to just write you off. That's what they want. That's why this Judy woman is so dangerous. You're going to have to ignore her. There are a few things in her video that she says that are probably true. She contributed something useful to the understanding of how AIDS works. Not revolutionary. She's not one of the greatest scientists of our time. These kinds of statements are bullshit. Sorry. These kinds of statements are baloney. But she's sucking you in, right? She's sucking you in to think that, oh my gosh, this whole vaccine story is a lie. Look at these pharmaceutical people, you know, they're evil demons. And they are evil demons. And they're wanting to vaccinate you against coronavirus is a lot like wanting to vaccinate you against the flu. There's a lot of debate about how much it helps. And there's going to be a lot of debate about it now. But the debate is all about trying to make you confused and to take away your ability to critically think, to make judgments for yourself. And so you've got to stay aware, you got to stay positive. You can't let it get you down. The confusion is what they want. So just remember that as you feel it. You're supposed to be confused. It's not because you're dumb. It's not because you don't understand biology or you didn't pay attention in high school. It's not that at all. The messages that they are giving you are contradictory. Very, very contradictory. You're supposed to pretend like you have the virus, but you don't know it. That's why you're wearing a mask. But you're also supposed to stay at home because you know you haven't had it yet. The entire premise of the pandemic is a contradiction. And so what I warned you about in the woods is real, and it's manifesting itself in a way that it's never manifested itself before. Scientists coming on calling results of drug trials highly significant when they're not. Complete dishonest reporting about the kinds of ways that money and value are being manipulated in our society right now. Completely and totally dishonest reporting. So you got to watch out for Judy, but in the same sense, the two doctors from California said a lot of things that they don't want you to hear. Stuff they said about your immune system and how your immune system works with symbiotic or let's say endemic flora. This is all true. And this part of the narrative is inconvenient for the you need to vaccinate, you need to stay at home and wait until we have a cure. And the reason why I'm saying this is very, very simple. We understand the biology of coronaviruses, and we understand the biology of coronavirus zoonosis. That's the truth. What we don't know, and we understand the risks associated with zoonosis and coronaviruses. We understand the risks because we've experienced them. SARS, MERS, bird flu, zoonosis, and viruses, zoonosis and coronaviruses in particular, but also flu viruses. And oxymoxyvirus, whatever the hell they're called. There are viruses that zoonotically jump around the world all the time. But the process of zoonosis is such that only extremely rarely does a zoonosis occur with pandemic potential. Never mind a zoonosis that generates a pandemic. And so that's the problem with this nonsense. is that the odds of generating a pandemic virus in the laboratory when you set out to do it are pretty close to 1. Like, probability of 1. And the probability of nature generating a pandemic virus is someone like 1,000,000 to 1. And so the argument they're making is so false on its face that sometimes it makes me sick to my stomach. And people like Peter Daszak, who are not actually scientists but simply coordinate several labs in an appeal for money, and then he sits on top of that mountain of money and distributes it while giving himself a healthy salary. That guy, for the last 20 years, has been shaking the tree, poking beehives, trying to find killer bees and murder hornets. And then when he finds them, he says, "See, I told you, you got to give me more money so I can save you from them." And he doesn't want you to believe that he's responsible. He wants you to believe that Mother Nature's responsible. You coming up? Okay. And I'm sorry, folks, but this is wrong. And I'm going to tell you why on the ride home. Hey, thanks for joining me on my morning ride. First of all, shout out to every mom out there. The only reason why I can make all of these videos is because the mom at home, the mother of my children, is such an all-star superhero. So thanks for the moms out there. Thanks for joining me on my morning ride. I'm going to try and put more morning rides up because I think they're going to help me organize my thoughts a little better. And I feel like it's material that sometimes I just end up throwing away because I'm not sure how to edit it together. And because I'm trying to always put out a succinct message, I think as long as I label these morning rides as kind of, whatever they are, kind of a free-for-all discussion, hopefully there'll be something useful there. This morning, a couple points that I really wanted to make. First of all, the pandemic video is going to continue to come out with probably more episodes or like more parts to it, and it's probably going to continue to be one of these largely misinformation campaigns. I think a couple points to make clear are that the legislation that currently exists around vaccines is incredibly stupid and shady, and it makes it very easy for the companies that make vaccines to take risks in terms of production, to cut corners in terms of production, and to maximize their costs on every angle because of the way the laws are designed. That being said, it doesn't mean that any pharmaceutical companies are responsible for mass negligence or anything like that, and that's not what I'm implying. What I more want to make sure that you're aware of is that videos like this are very easy traps to fall into, where if you start to buy into one of these interesting ideas that's probably true, you're going to also then buy into this huge pile of lies. And that's the throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What they're going to suggest to you is that vaccines, to deny vaccines, to be skeptical of vaccines, to be skeptical of vaccines for the coronavirus would be crazy. And you're going to throw that baby out with the entire bath that is the pandemic. The Plandemic, that movie. So let me make that very clear again. The idea in my mind of this propaganda is to put a few ideas in there that they want you to throw away, along with all the ideas that you're going to throw away. And those ideas that you're going to throw away are going to be thrown away because you're going to find out over time that Judy is probably a fraud. She committed fraud earlier in her scientific career. She might have gotten caught, and then as a result lost a lot of her sort of standing in the field. She was never a big star. She was never a big star at NIH. She was never a big star at this private company that she was the head of for a while. So I think it's important to know, to take this with a grain of salt. This is definitely a propaganda trap designed to make you fall into this general category of absurdity called anti-vaxxers. And once you fall there, you're going to question everything else that you do from now on because of the social rejection you feel, and then you'll no longer question the one true thing that they say in that video, which is we should be very skeptical of any vaccines or treatments that are pushed on us as a result of the coronavirus. We should insist on full trials. We should insist on very significant results. And otherwise, we should be very careful. There's a lot of profit to be made. There's a lot of lies being told. And we need to go in eyes and ears wide open. This is further exemplified on the other side of the coin by the story of the market origin of the virus. And I think this is also extremely important to understand, that by suggesting that the only possible scenario where this virus could have originated is the poor people shopping in an open air market in Wuhan is absurd. And the reason why it's absurd is because of the 17 plus years of viral research that has been organized and orchestrated through the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Disease. Through a number of non-governmental organizations, this money, our taxpayer money, has been distributed to labs that do gain-of-function research in viruses. By gain-of-function research, I mean taking viruses from nature and using a combination of or any number of methodologies that allow viruses to evolve in the laboratory, to change in the laboratory, and even to be edited in the laboratory, and then screened through animal or culture hosts for further specificities. These techniques have been used for nearly 2 decades to explore the coronavirus biology that we have come to understand today as common cold respiratory viruses and the zoonoses that Peter Daszak wants you to let him save you from. The trouble with this logic is that he would like you to ignore the obvious biological threat that is the collection and isolation and recombination of these viruses in laboratories around the world, but especially in China. The reason why this is important to understand is because these studies, which are reported in journals, don't necessarily report all of the viruses they've collected and all of the viruses they've analyzed. The reason why we know this to be true is very, very simple. Because the virus that was purported to be the closest relation in the wild to this current pandemic virus was reported in 2020 in a paper in 2020 by an author who claims to have found it in 2013. And the uncanny resemblance to the original SARS begs the question of why this scientist did not cite this virus in the original paper because of its extreme homology to the original SARS and the obvious potential for human spreading. This has led many researchers on the internet to believe that this is a deception and that this virus did indeed come from this laboratory. Now yet another series of papers has come out with pangolin viruses that have similar receptor binding domains, spike proteins, and even further, the latest paper that came out today shows a bat virus collected in 2019 from a similar place as collected in 2013 with an even greater homology. Again, viruses that were collected previously are now popping out of nowhere to show us without a doubt that this virus came from nature. And as Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet, something like, "The lady doth protest too much." When you protest this much, when you insist this much on a particular interpretation of a biological phenomenon, in my mind it's disingenuous at least, and outright deception at worst. And I think these 2 points, we have to be very clear, are the same thing. With Peter Daszak, he wants you to throw out everything that has to do with everything you've known about immunology and microbiology and the way that previous viruses have spread through the world and the way that previous respiratory viruses spread every year locally in different places around the world. He wants you to ignore all the epidemiologists that tell you that we've had this every year. He wants you to ignore the epidemiologists that suggest that we have coronaviruses, novel ones, every year. He wants you to accept one particular biological story for how this virus emerged, while ignoring the extremely likely potential represented by viral research that he himself is involved in orchestrating. Very specifically, I need you to understand that I'm not suggesting this is the reason or the source of this virus, but I am suggesting that if it's a natural virus, then the epidemiologists that are coming out against all of the changes that we have made in society are right, because there is no need to change how we behave as a population and as a human race for something that has existed for centuries and thousands of years. It's a fact of life that this is going to happen, and people are going to die occasionally from viruses because we have so many people and we live such a crowded, interconnected life. That does not require us to give up all social aspects of our life to wait for a hypothetical cure that will never come from Big Pharma. This is the primary deception that's happening right now. And I think the main thing that I want to keep you aware of, because biologically speaking, if this is a virus that originates from a laboratory, either collected in nature or the product of recombination or serial passage through culture or through animal hosts in the laboratory, then we have reason to believe that we have a serious non-normal, non-natural phenomenon on our hand, and then all kinds of different measures may need to be taken. But more specifically, we would put our medical community on the right foot as they move forward, trying to find a suitable treatment to make the survival rate of this COVID-19 disease increase. Right now, we are still trapped under the same paradigm of pneumonia followed by ARDS and ventilation. And while most doctors will insist that ventilation is the only way forward, we are still stuck in that paradigm, and we need to move forward thinking about how we could have done it differently and how we will do it differently if there is a second wave this fall or this winter. I could keep going forever, but I'm afraid my battery's going to run out. Thanks for joining me on the morning ride. The afternoon ride should be just as good. I hope this rant was useful. Thanks for joining me again. If you liked, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on J.C. on a Bike.